The US and Russia after World War II realized that they had different ideas for post-war Europe. Russia planned to spread their ideals of communism throughout the world, and the US wanted to stop Russia from doing so. So they planned to do something called containment, which basically means to stop communism from spreading. To help the stop of expansion, the US helped out post-war Europe recover, making people favor capitalism over communism. The ways the US helped were doing such as the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. Post-war Germany was split up between the US, France, Britain, and the Soviet Union. The main section split was between the East and West, the East being where the Soviet Union took power. This divided Europe, creating an Iron Curtain. The people in the East Germany didn't like being under Soviet control, so some left, but this ended up making Russia start a blockade in East Germany, keeping them captive. People couldn't leave or enter, or could have trade. The people were starving on the streets of East Berlin, so the US went to go fly over troops and drop goods for the people to have in East Germany, and it was known as the Berlin Airlift. After a while, the borders were opened up for trade. Sometime later, the US and other allied countries formed NATO. NATO was made so if one country went into war or was attacked, all the other allied countries would go and support that one. Russia made a NATO-like contract as well a while later. Sometime later, Russia got some inside information on how the nuclear weapons made by the US, like the ones dropped in Japan in World War II, were made, and successfully demonstrated that they could use the nukes. The US decided to make even a more powerful bomb, which was the hydrogen bomb. It was so powerful that the US never decided to drop it on anyone. Next, Russia planned to spread communism to China, with the Soviets supporting the communist side under leader Mao Zedong, and the US supporting the nationalist side. Mao and his side won over, and most nationalists that were kicked out of China and moved to Taiwan, where more nationalists fled to. After World War II, Korea was split up in two by the Soviet Union and the US. It was at the 38th parallel, and the capitalistic ideas were in the South. North Korea was influenced by communism heavily, and North Korea was fighting to take control of South Korea. This started the Korean War. North Korea was invading the South, and there were concerns that China, also being a communist country and a nearby one at that, would step into the fight. So General Douglas MacArthur wanted to get permission to drop a nuke in China so they won't have time to invade. For that, he was decommissioned after. After 3 years, Russia and the US both decided to cease fire and left both North and South Korea bordered at the 38th parallel. The border being the same spot helped show that nothing came out of the war. Vietnam too broke off and became free around this time. The North was communist and South was being anti-communist. The US went to go help stop the spread because of something called the domino theory. The domino theory is how communism would spread into other countries like an infection. The war lasted so long, till 9 years into the war, the US was only helping from afar. But after 2 North Vietnamese sunk 2 US ships, the US had to send troops into the fight. After a couple more years, the people of America did not like the death in the war anymore. So the current president, Nixon, did a tactic where he slowly pulled troops out of the war called Vietnamization. South Vietnam fell under communism 2 years later, with no nearby countries falling under communism. Nixon did some other things in office, though, such as doing detente. He did things like visiting communist China while still being in office and signing the SALT Treaty, which limited nuclear capabilities of both Russia and the US. After Nixon, next was Jimmy Carter. 2 years into his term, he signed another SALT Treaty, which limited both superpowers even more. When Ronald Reagan became president, he practically erased all the progress Nixon did to loosening tensions, because he timed them again by doing things such as calling the Soviets evil and more things. Luckily, by now the Cold War was coming to an end, with the Berlin Wall and the Soviet Union falling.